Reaction. This is Why Did the Soviet Calendar Fail? Short animated documentary by the channel, obviously, History Matters. Many revolutionary governments have attempted to reform the calendar, and the Soviet government was no different. I mean, it kind of makes sense. Soviets were, atheist. And since the calendar that we use is Gregorian calendar, we obviously in Catholic calendar, right? Catholics came up with it. Obviously, the original one is Julius Caesar, right? Goes back to his team, I guess, who came up with it. But that wasn't an accurate calendar, right? That was off by many days. So Pope Gregory and his Jesuit priests basically perfected it that we use today. So in a way, that's why it's Catholic. As I said, Catholics came up with the calendar, and certain people get pissed off in the comments like Catholic didn't come up with it. It was Romans came up with it. It's a Julian calendar. I know, but it's like saying Einstein didn't do shit because his original gravity, was Newton's discovery. No, that's not the case, right? Einstein perfected it. E equals mc square matters. So the point is, it doesn't surprise me. Soviet tried to make another calendar. There have been so many different calendars. I think one I can remember because I was reading about it recently was something called Henke Henry Permanent, right? Henke Henry Permanent calendar, if I remember correctly. The goal of that calendar was, I think, if I remember correctly, that the calendar was made that events fall in the place same time every year, right? Like Christmas would come Sunday every year, right? Certain events would happen at the same day every year, right? I mean, whether it's Sunday, Monday, whatever. So in a way that feels right. Like, okay, that's a good calendar. Why not use it? But it wasn't accurate as the Gregorian calendar. The thing with the current calendar is that it's really accurate, right? With the leap seconds, leap days here and there, all the way up to the 4 centuries rule that we go by, it's really accurate for thousands and thousands of years, right? If you try to change that, then it becomes a question of like, what do you value more, right? Because 30-day rule, I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? Because it ties to the moon cycles. If you change that, I guess what you're trying to do, because throughout the years, farmers, right? Usually that's where it was, everything was there because it's season, moon cycles. So it makes sense with the 30-day rule. Year is obviously, it's just a cycle around the sun, right? And obviously it's not completely that. But if we just try to be completely accurate, like, okay, let's be completely accurate. Cycle around the sun, perfect. Then, the day starts at different time of the, day, like 3 a.m., 6 a.m., So, it's a good compromise, the current calendar. So, yeah, Soviet, I don't know what different they would have done it, but it's going to be fun. Let's watch it.
Throughout European history, there have been many attempts to reform the calendar. Perhaps the most famous was during the French Revolution, where its leaders opted to change the calendar to something less religion-y. But one attempt that's less well known was when the government of the USSR adopted a reformed Gregorian calendar in 1929, which changed the 7-day week to a 5-day one and later into a 6-day week. This calendar was changed back to the same one that the rest of the Western world used in 1940, which raises the question, why? Why did the Soviet calendar fail? When the Russian Revolution was over and the previous government was unavailable, Lenin and his comrades sought to reform the way that society worked, and one of their first acts was to move away from the old Julian calendar. Yet in the late 1920s, Soviet ministers were concerned that there wasn't enough work going on in the workers' state. The problem was that those who were doing the work were quite fond of things like having Sundays off. And given the Soviet leadership's dislike of all things religious, something had to be done. One of the long-standing proposals had been to radically reform the calendar. This was largely ridiculed because it was seen as being excessive and also very difficult to implement. That was until Stalin came across the idea and gave it his approval. At which point it promptly became the greatest idea since some German fellow wrote a pamphlet. And so with this, the top minds of the USSR came up with a brand new calendar, one in which there were 5 days in a week and 6 weeks in a month. Across these 5 days, 1/5 of its workforce would have a different day off. Months with 31 days would see a 6-day work week, and everybody got 5 national holidays off. This way, workers would be more rested than the previous 1 in 7 days they had off. Employers would also have 80% of their workforce available at all times, and Sundays would importantly be robbed of their religious significance. In 1929 and 1930, the new calendar was brought in across numerous industries. Importantly, this new calendar wasn't meant to replace the Gregorian calendar that most people used. This new one was just used alongside it so people would know when they were working. So why did the USSR get rid of it? Well, there were numerous problems. The first was that Sundays had previously been used to repair machinery and catch up on any unfinished work in the previous week, which thus could no longer be done. Another problem was that many people became disgruntled since their days off and those of their friends and families didn't match up. As such, the central government came up with a new idea, the 6-day week. This meant that everybody would do more work, and furthermore, an employer would give everybody the 6th, the 12th, the 18th, the 24th, and the 30th of every month off. This didn't fix all of the problems, and combined with the fact that many industries hadn't really adopted the calendar at all, Stalin opted to abandon the idea in 1940.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the gist of it, right? If something works and it works so great like the Gregorian calendar does and everybody's using it, bringing anything new at that point would be like, okay, how am I going to convince everybody to ditch the current calendar? I mean, it's not really going to happen. That's the thing. Whenever something becomes too big, right? What's the saying, right? Certain companies and organizations are too big to fail, and others are so big they're too big to care or something, right? That's the case with the calendar, right? It's so big, everybody. I mean, look at the Chinese. Even we in India, right? We have our own, calendar in a way. I don't know if there is one or multiple, but yeah. But in the end, we use Gregorian calendars, right? Even Chinese, because that's how you do international trading. Even if so, I mean, obviously Soviet Union was close-bordered, right? But yeah, even if they had tried to make entire country just use that calendar, it wouldn't have been efficient, right? Eventually, they would have like, okay, this is not working. We need to use Gregorian now. So, but yeah, this is great that they actually tried it.
40. Everybody returned to the 7-day work week, and employers were free to give people whichever days off they wanted, so long as they met their targets, that is. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and a special thanks to my patrons, James Bisonet, Kelly Moneymaker.
Yeah, so see, the 7 days significant because it's the halfway point to the moon cycle, 15 days, right? That's when you're full moon, then 15 years after, yeah. So 30 days important because of that. 7 days is also halfway to that, right? So obviously, it creates this kind of a pattern there along the way. You can't just ditch it. People have been using that for centuries. I mean, yeah. So it's always hard. Like I said, the permanent calendar that I was talking about was kind of good in a way that it matches the date and seasons perfectly, and even the holidays perfectly. But it was off, right? So if your priority is just match certain days perfectly, certain holidays perfectly, season perfectly, then you're gonna get something off eventually. Calendar is a compromise, and the current one is just working fine. Why change it? Right, people? If you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you next time.